When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Griff YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking young Griff in Winds of Winter. One of your guys' favorites, as I can always tell based upon community interaction and or just how these videos do. But you guys had a ton of questions and topics, by far way more than any of the ones we've done so far, whether that be with Halloween week with the Bulletins and the Freys or Jon or Davos. We had a lot. So I tried to get to all of your guys's. Hopefully I got them all. Again, if you want to make sure your question goes through, follow the Instagram. I'm even going to start putting them on Discord as well, you know, putting those out for the community, just so I can see them, right? They won't disappear. YouTube, sometimes comments just are hidden for some reason, or they're not there, but then they come back later. So yeah, I just want to point that out. If you do want to make sure your, comment or your topic is in the video, do it on those other platforms outside of YouTube. It's just easier for me to A, to see them, and two, they won't just randomly go away. Those links will always be in the description if you want to do that. But let's get into young Griff. Now, I tried to do my best to put all of your guys' comments together in a way that made sense, because a lot of you guys had very similar questions or topics. Especially one that came up a lot was the Kingsguard for young Griff. So I made sure to kind of put all of that stuff together so we're not retracking the same content over and over again. But let's get into the questions and or topics. So, a comment that was made that wasn't really, a comment or a topic, or wasn't really a question or a topic, is Hublito. Hope I said that right, maybe not. But they say, I actually found your channel while searching for young Griff content. So yeah, I think a lot of people find my content through young Griff stuff just because it's some of my best performing when it comes to a certain character outside of Stannis. But yeah, something I found interesting is that someone commented that young Griff is not as popular of a character in the community. Like, people don't like him as much, which I find really weird, given that I think my community, I don't know if people like him or they just love talking about him or love, hearing me talk about him, because I have a really specific way I like to talk about how his character is going to go. But yeah, getting into the next comment, we have a comment from 215. So if you do comment, if you want to, put your name down or anything, but I will just go by off of your username. I want to know, does young Griff / Fagon actually look like Rhaegar Targaryen? Does he sound like him, act like him? Because there are many people with Valyrian features / ancestry, but does he look like he's Rhaegar or Elya's son? What is his Dornish feature? So we actually don't really have a great description of him. Like, we have a little bit, again, the blue hair and things of that nature. But even if you look up on the World of Ice and Fire wiki, it's a very short description for him. But the things I can tell you about him is that if we are going to try and look at his physical appearance and trying to, match, is he actually Rhaegar and Elya's, the one thing we have to take into account that's very consistent with what we actually know of the real Aegon Targaryen that was Rhaegar and Elya's, is that Aegon seemed to favor his father. He didn't have much of the Dornish features in him. That's how he is described, as a younger, baby, more or less. Whereas his sister, Rhaenys, was described more like Elia, had more of the Dornish features. So right away, when we're looking at young Griff, a lot of the Valyrian stuff is there, right? That we're kind of told. He looks a lot like a Valyrian. So that would kind of at least lean towards Rhaegar, because Rhaegar did look very Valyrian. So he does, in a term, just regardless, because he looks Valyrian, looks like Rhaegar. If we think about Orain Waters, he has some of those Valyrian features, and he himself looks like Rhaegar a bit to Cersei. So if you kind of take someone that maybe he's even a Blackfyre, maybe he, is, some Targaryen in him, he is going to look like Rhaegar regardless. So to me, I think there's not a lot we can really draw here. I think maybe things that you could look at, like, does he sound and act like him? Not really, I would assume, because Rhaegar really strikes me as someone that was like this, like, if you're gonna go modern type, like this, really, sad, depressed guitarist, musician type, and that doesn't really strike me as young Griff. Young Griff, sparks as he gives me a little bit more like he's a bit more emotional when it comes to giving into, you know, anger, things like that. We see how in his game with Tyrion, he kind of gets really upset. He basically does a rage quit. So to me, I don't really think young Griff and Rhaegar's personality is quite the same at all. So that's something you can maybe point to. I don't think, you know, him and his father, if Rhaegar is his father, are the same really at all. Maybe that's something you point to on why Aegon is not Rhaegar's, but at the same time, I think it also comes to, okay, young Griff has been raised by a certain group of people his entire life, and the way you're brought up is definitely going to change how you are as a person. So that'll get us into our next question with Lazarus, and they say they read an interesting theory that Griff is actually the real Quentyn Martell, and that the Quentyn Martell that we know is actually Aegon. Furthermore, Lady Lamore is Doran's wife. Okay, so a couple things here. I actually don't mind the Doran's wife theory. I don't know a lot about like the timing of how that would have worked. But that's an interesting one. I haven't heard that before. But the other parts of this I don't really get. They don't really make sense to me. Like Quentyn Martell does not look Valyrian at all, like in the slightest. So how would he pull off looking Valyrian? Because like Tyrion notes that he looks Valyrian. Like Jon kind of notes he looks Valyrian. Like he can't look Dornish. It doesn't make any sense. Like it could, given that, okay, maybe he takes after Elia, but we know like his description when he was a baby and he was younger was he didn't look Dornish. He looked like a Valyrian. He looked like Aegon, or he looked like Rhaegar. So the first part of this, I don't really understand how that would make any sense, but I don't know. Let me know if there's more to it. Noro Burrow asks, is it actually a more interesting story if Varys isn't lying and young Griff is actually Aegon Targaryen, but people who follow and oppose him believed him to be a Blackfyre? That'd be really interesting. So how this would work, I guess, would be that some sort of information gets out. Maybe Dany's camp spreads some misinformation about him. Maybe that's what ends up happening. But in reality, he actually is a Targaryen. That could be interesting. I don't find it more interesting than Aegon just being a Blackfyre, because I think it'd be really more interesting for Dany's camp specifically. Now, Dany in this like position would still be in an interesting spot because she would be, whether she knows it or not, you know, spreading lies about Aegon to better her own claim. But I think it works better in the situation where Dany is this character that knows that he's a Blackfyre, that this guy is taking her birthright. They've had this their two families have had this rivalry for generations. And this person, young Griff, is the one getting all this praise, all of the love, and he's a Blackfyre, where she's the Targaryen, the real heir, even though Jon probably is actually the heir at this point, and she is getting none of that. So I think that works better for her character. I think it works better for the story, and I am a real big sucker for the Blackfyres. I really like the dynamic that they pose with the Targaryens, and so I would rather see him as a Blackfyre. That's another whole thing that we have to get into, my personal bias, right? Like, I want him to be about Blackfyre because I think I like what it does for the story more than if he's a Targaryen. But I will say, like, when we get into more of the questions on his actual parentage in this video, I think it is a bit more 50-50 than people make it out to be. I think there's a lot of people like me that want him to be a Blackfyre, but when you look at the evidence, I've done a video on both, right? If you guys want to see my real opinions on why he's a Blackfyre or Targaryen, I've done a video supporting both claims. And I find both of them very fascinating. Like, there's a lot of interesting evidence that backs up both. So that's why I think if you have the opinion that he's a Targaryen, or if you have the opinion that he's a Blackfyre, I really don't blame you. I think there's good evidence to back up both. Phil asks, what reason do you think Varys and Illyrio will give for giving Dany all the dragon eggs when they can act as a source of legitimacy for young Griff? I believe young Griff wasn't invented until after book 1 was released, but it would be nice to have a logical reason why. So here's what I'm going to say about this. One, I agree with you 100%. Young Griff was not invented until after book 1. I am like 100% sure on that. If you also think of the Blackfyres, at this point, the Blackfyres really also were not invented. They aren't really even name dropped until I think book 3. So again, I think that makes a lot of sense. And when you look at young Griff as a character, and you also look at when the Blackfyres probably came into George's head, it really coincides, and I kind of like that idea. That's why it would make sense for me. But I think for me personally, the reason that Illyrio would give Dany the eggs in this scenario is because, one, nobody could have believed that they were going to hatch. So I know that's not what you're asking here, but I just want to expand for anyone else thinking that. There's no way you could expect them to hatch. 2, I think it was just kind of a gift to Dany to, again, it's a rich gift, right? Dany is marrying the biggest cow, again, in the world at this point. One of the most powerful men. It's really seen as not only just a gift to Dany, but to Drogo, to gain favor with Drogo. Because again, you can't really predict he's going to unexpectedly die, right, in this book. And so it's kind of a gift to both of them. Now, I also have made the idea of, like, if Varys and Illyrio really wanted to back Viserys, why wouldn't they just give these eggs to him? Because then he could actually buy an army. He could buy maybe some unsullied, some sellswords. He could do all these things with those eggs because they're so valuable, right? If you want to make a comparison, think about Lord of the Rings and Mithril. It's almost the same equivalent. And so that's something that also is kind of interesting. But, you know, saving these eggs for young Griff, giving him a sign of legitimacy, I get your point, but I think maybe here's the other thing, right? If Varys and Illyrio at this point have the sword Blackfyre, they could just use that instead. So this is one of those questions that I think we just don't know the full extent of Varys and Illyrio's plan yet, so it's hard to really judge this. Plus, you also look at the idea that you pointed out that I don't think young Griff or the Blackfyres as a whole are fully thought out yet by George. Matthew J says, do we find out he's a Blackfyre in Winds or Dream? So, if we do find out if he's a Blackfyre, right, there's another question that we have about this, but if we do find out that he's a Blackfyre or he's an actual Targaryen, which I definitely think George could leave this up to interpretation. It makes a lot of sense given his writing style. But if we do get a definitive answer, I think it could be in the back end of, or maybe the middle to back end section of Winds, if Dany, and I think she will, go to Pentos and have some interaction with Illyrio. That's where I think this revelation could come to an head, because I think it makes a lot of sense for George to give Dany some sort of information that leads her to believe that he's a Blackfyre. I think that makes a lot of sense, whether it's the truth or it's not, like we talked about earlier in this video. That will lead us to a question from Guccio. Hopefully I said that right. I don't think I did. What would young Griff do if he found out that he really isn't Rhaegar and Elya's son, but someone else like a Blackfyre or Illyrio's son, or even the son of Rhaegar and Ashara, which I still think is a possibility? It's evident in the books that he really believes he is the legitimate heir. Even Jon Connington believes this is true. He serves the cause precisely because he sees it as a way of making up to Rhaegar. The only people that know the truth are Illyrio and Varys, perhaps Lemore and the Half-Maester. Would they carry on with the plan, or would they walk away in disgust? So, I think when you look at this from being just a human aspect, young Griff, again, he has been told his entire life that he is this person. And so, when you think about that, you think about people that lie so much that eventually that lie becomes their truth. The way they see the world, I think for young Griff to really doubt himself and really change course because of who he is as a person, there would have to be overwhelming evidence, right? Like Illyrio and Varys would have to tell him specifically that he is not, like that they did something else, right? That he is just some Valyrian kid that they found on the streets or something like that. Or that, yes, he is a Blackfyre, right? That he is Illyrio's son or whatnot. That would have to happen. And I don't know if Illyrio or Varys would ever tell him something like that. Because here's the difference. If Dany comes over saying, oh yeah, Illyrio said this, well, he can say, okay, but you also had him at Dragon Point. He was going to say anything. And there's no real proof that he actually said that, right? Like, young Griff has no way of, you know, verifying that statement. And so I think this is going to be another thing that could antagonize young Griff against Dany, is that Dany calls him someone that he isn't, that in his mind he isn't, and denying that just so that she can sit herself on the throne. Because think about this from young Griff's point of view. Dany is coming over, and it's very convenient if she starts saying that young Griff's a Blackfyre, because now she's the actual Targaryen. She's the one on the throne. And so I find this is an interesting idea, is like, I don't really see this ever really playing out. Right? I don't think young Griff is ever going to get definitive evidence that he isn't Aegon. I think it's something that may, you know, he may have to question, but I think he'll be very confident in who he is, because that's who he's been told he is his entire life. Now, someone like Jon Connington is someone that I think could question it more than young Griff, because he's going to be sitting here going, okay, wait, I was tricked this whole time. Now, that would be really interesting. I don't think young Griff is going to go into it. I think he's too young. I think he's too sure in himself on who he is. And so that's kind of my response to that. And so that kind of leads us to Storm's End and that plot going there. We only have 2 real questions here, but Pork says, how will the Lords of Westeros react to his arrival overall? Will it be more of a welcoming party or a general resistance? So a tough question to answer based upon, there's going to be a lot of different ways you can look at young Griff. So the first one is going to be, okay, how does maybe the South react to him? Well, Dorne is going to be super happy, right? Because they're being told this is Elya's son coming back. They're going to want to support him. We already see Arianne probably going to get them involved in that camp. The Reach. Now, I think the Reach is going to be somewhat divided, because you're going to have some people that maybe know he's a Blackfyre, say the Peaks or people like that. You're going to have other people like the Tarleys or maybe even the Florents or some of these other people that can see a way to gain power for themselves, and they're already unhappy with, say, the Tyrells or the Lannister regime. I think the more important part, not the Lords of Westeros, is going to be the common people. I think a lot of the common people are going to rally behind young Griff, because you look at the Lannisters, a lot of misrule, a lot of negative vibes going towards her, right? We just had Cersei walking naked through the entire city. The Lannister reputation is tarnished, right? The heads of their family are gone, right? Kevin, Tywin, they're gone. Tyrion is off in Essos. Jaime is going to go missing, right, in the Riverlands. Their power base and the people that were really in charge are gone. All you have left is Cersei, and she has a terrible reputation. The people are already ready to have this unifying force, and young Griff is going to be the most likable candidate that they've had since Renly, right? Think about the available options right now. You have Tommen, a Boy King. You have Stannis up in the north, who no one really likes him. You have Euron Greyjoy, and people do not like the Ironborn, and also he's raiding the Reach, so he's not a very likable candidate for most of the people at this point. So I think the general public is actually going to be behind young Griff. I think it will be almost a welcoming party in a certain aspect to this. There will be some resistance, like how is the Tyrell plot going to, resolve itself with young Griff? How is, the Cersei plot going to resolve itself? So there is that resistance there, but I think it's fairly welcoming to young Griff compared to a lot of other rulers. User NM asks, is he going to win the Battle of Steel? So Battle of Steel, again, referring to Mace Tyrell has a force coming to Storm's End. And I am someone that doesn't believe there's going to be a conflict here. And even if there is a conflict, right? Let's go, there is a conflict. It doesn't make sense for young Griff to lose here, right? It doesn't make sense for him to have a massive setback like, say, Stannis after Blackwater. The story just would fall apart, because then it'd be like, okay, why did we spend so much time on this storyline and dance if it's just going to go nowhere in Winds of Winter anyway? Like, it doesn't really make sense logically. And so what I've come to is that either A, young Griff is going to win this battle. 2, Mace Tyrell and the Tyrells are just not going to engage this, right? They're just going to, stay out of it and let young Griff do his thing. And then they'll kind of make their moves after that. Maybe they even say, screw the Lannisters, and they, ally, or maybe even secretly ally with young Griff and the Blackfyre regime. I think all those are possible. I think he has to win, though. It doesn't make sense for him to lose. And that will go to, again, crowning of Aegon. So him taking King's Landing and his time on the Iron Throne, albeit as short as it's probably going to be. So assuming this comes from Maz, assuming that young Griff / Aegon VI takes the Iron Throne, who do you think he will choose as his queen? I think it will be Arianne. I think, there is some other shots here. Maybe someone like Sansa, which we'll talk about later in a question, because someone was talking about Littlefinger during the situation. This could be someone like Marjorie. Maybe you even see a bit of what Aegon did with his sisters, right? So he married Visenya and Rhaenys. Maybe we see someone like Aegon marry Arianne and Marjorie, right? I don't know how the Tyrells would feel about that, how the Dorns would feel about that, but maybe young Griff does that. He says, I'm a Targaryen, let's bring it back. It helps unify more people to my banner. Maybe I do that instead. I don't know. That could be something that he maybe looks at. And so this kind of starts a lot of questions actually on the Kingsguard. And so Otto asks, theories on who will join his Kingsguard. And if no character comes to mind, can you think of which houses they will come from? Also, will Fagon ever be a POV? So let me answer the last one actually. Fagon, I don't think he will ever be a POV. I don't think so. I mean, George just can't make anymore. He already has Jon, Con, and Arianne who are POVs around Aegon. George really likes not giving us the POV of the king, which I think makes a lot of sense. So I don't think we'll ever get a POV from him. But going back to who I think his Kingsguard will be, it's a difficult question. Because I don't think, again, we saw with Renly, right, with his Rainbow Guard, that he made that pretty quickly. But we also look at, like, he was going really slow towards King's Landing. He was someone taking his time. He was having a lot of tournaments, things like that. That doesn't really seem like it's on young Griff's mind. And I think when you look at young Griff and Jon Con, they're trying to take the throne. They're not worried about things like the Kingsguard right now. And so I don't think this would, even happen even a little bit until we actually got to King's Landing. And so say we get to King's Landing and, all this is going down. I don't think he actually will name a lot of people to his Kingsguard. I think someone that makes a lot of sense and jumped out to me right off the bat was someone like Darkstar. It can make a lot of sense, right? Arthur Dayne was a really big companion of Rhaegar. You bring in Darkstar, another Dayne, bring that to Aegon. I also think Oraine Waters makes a lot of sense to come to Aegon's campaign again. Really kind of looking at Aegon the Conqueror and kind of making a lot of parallels there with the Velaryons being one of the biggest supporters for Aegon. Having Darkstar to, again, parallel to his father Rhaegar and Arthur. So I think a lot of these things make sense to me, and I think Darkstar being one of the best fighters that we hear of in the story at this point makes a lot of sense for me for him to be someone in the Kingsguard. Outside of that, I can't think of anyone that really comes to mind instantly that would make a lot of sense. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. So on the Kingsguard, right, I think Darkstar makes a lot of sense, but I don't know who else. So again, if you guys want to let me know down in the comments on your thoughts on the Kingsguard, that's kind of my answer for the Kingsguard question going forward as well. Tyler asks, will he accept the explanation that a dragon is still a dragon, whether it is red or black? Whom will be his other 6 Kingsguard? Will Jon Con outlive Fagon? And when will we see Blackfyre the sword? Okay, so a very loaded question, but I don't think the explanation will ever actually come to young Griff. I don't really think it makes sense. Well, it could, depending on how George does it, but I like the story more if young Griff doesn't know that, right? That nobody tells him that he's actually a Blackfyre unless it's coming from people he does not trust. So Dany, right? Young Griff has a lot of reason to mistrust him or mistrust her, right? And so I don't think that's ever going to get posed as a question to him. His other 6 Kingsguard, right? I just talked about this. I think Darkstar could be one. I don't know who else I would throw into that category. Will Jon Con outlive Fagon? This is a tough one because we know Jon Con's kind of already dying because of grayscale. But I do like the idea here that Jon Con lives long enough to see someone that's basically been his son, Rhaegar's son, someone that he's put a lot of his investment and time into die before him. Could be really tragic, poetic. It's something that George really likes to do. You could parallel it with characters like Cersei and Catelyn watching all their children die or go missing or believing they're dead. It would be really not nice, but it'd be really tragic. It'd feel a lot like what George R. R. Martin likes to do. But I think narratively, I do think young Griff outlives Jon Con, but I'm not sure on that one. I really like both ways that you can go with that one. But let me know what you guys think. And when will we see Blackfyre the sword? I would love to see Blackfyre the sword as young Griff takes the Iron Throne. If we see it at all, which I really hope we do. I think we should. It just makes sense that we do at some point. Even if young Griff is not a Blackfyre. Blackfyre is still Aegon the Conqueror's sword. It would just a lot of parallels to that idea. That leads us to Fair Share of Drowned Souls, who has a lot of questions as well. And again, we have Kingsguard predictions, so I'm not going to answer this one because we've talked about it a couple times now. Aegon the Sixth parentage not mattering since he will actually turn out to be a decent ruler, and the tragedy of him dying likely at Dany's command, who will be a villain by that point. I don't know if well, okay, let me put it this way. I actually really do think that Aegon's parentage could be something that we just never figure out. So in a way, you're right. George kind of leaves it ambiguous, where some people believe he's a Blackfyre, some people believe he's a Targaryen, just like how it is now in the community, but just the rest of the story. And so you're sitting here going, okay, maybe it didn't even matter, right? Where Aegon was actually a good ruler. He could have been someone that ruled the kingdoms, but because of things like pride, because of how Dany viewed her destiny and things of that nature, and how she thought she was this person that's going to be bringing back the Targaryen dynasty after her brother Viserys' death and then also her son's death, Yeah, I could see a way in which that could be the great tragedy of it all. And also Dany being this character that, because of how good Aegon maybe is as a ruler, we see Dany as the villain of the story, where we actually finally had a little bit of, well, how should I say this, peace. Right? We had a little bit of just a good ruler. The kingdoms seemed like they were in hand, and Dany kind of wrecks that. That could be something George could play on. We could see something where we understand why Dany believes he should not be on the throne, because she has some information that she believes he's a Blackfyre. And so really the Blackfyres being the greatest enemy of the Targaryens, it's her duty to take them out. But public perception doesn't agree on that, right? The way we maybe view that isn't the same. So that's why I love Dany and young Griff's future going forward, because I think George has so many routes to play on the two characters, on how we think of Dany specifically. Aegon the Sixth wife, I've also talked about as well, but I think Arianne would be my main answer for that. And Aegon the Sixth hand after Jon Con dies. That one really depends on who is going to be around at this point, who is on young Griff's side. I think someone like Randall Tarley could fit really well into this. One of the peaks. I'm not even sure who's actually ruling at this point for the peaks, but it could be the Lord for the peaks at this time. That makes a lot of sense. It would have a lot of parallels to the Blackfyres. Could be one of his companions from his growing up. There's a lot of opportunities there that you could, put down. Maybe if Mace Tyrell switches to his side, that could make sense as well. Moving on, we have Aegor himself, and he, very invested in this question for some reason, and I'm just saying. But do you think that young Griff will have a moment where he's confronted and has to think about that he is not who he thinks he is? I think he will have a moment in which, yes, he does contemplate maybe the rumors going around about his parentage, who he is, and I think inevitably he will stick to who he's been his entire life. I think he will be someone that is not going to be swayed because of others, because he's going to see why they would spread those rumors, why they'd be saying who he is, and go, wait, that's why they're spreading it. Not because it's truthful, but because they have something to gain from it, right? It would be how I think someone like Joffrey, Tom, and Myrcella would have viewed Stannis' stuff, right? Stannis is saying all these things like they are bastards, they are Jaime and Cersei's, because Stannis has something to gain, right? I think that's a very similar thing that we would see here with young Griff. Don't know if we can ask to, and yes, Aegor, you can ask to. But also, do you think he will have a moment with this, with his maybe dad Illyrio, or they'll never just see each other again? So this depends heavily on if Dany kills Illyrio, if she goes back to Pentos. I don't think she will, because again, the way Dany thinks about Illyrio is as a friend, as someone that supported her and helped her early on, gave her the dragon eggs. If this revelation kind of came out, she started connecting all the dots in her head that young Griff's a Blackfyre and that Illyrio hasn't really been helping them. I don't know if she'll kill him or not, but if she doesn't kill him, I think there is a possibility that Illyrio could come to King's Landing before Dany and that conflict starts. Maybe we see the two again. I don't know. I think it's, again, 50-50. Andrew asks, will Aegon clash with Euron at Old Town to win support from the Reach? What would that battle look like? Again, this is a tough one. I don't think so, right? I don't think so because, one, Aegon is going for the throne, right? He wants the throne first. And I think the whole thing is if we introduce the Euron plot into the Aegon plot as well, it's just, there's so many things that have to happen, right? Because Aegon, we know, probably is going to sit the throne by the end, right? That's how I view things. But if he doesn't, okay, so now we have this whole conflict with the Tyrells that storms in, and the whole wrapping up of that plot, with Arianne's plot also coming in. I think if we were going to see something like that, maybe it's because the Dornish and Darkstar deal with it, or they have some interaction there with Euron. I'm not sure there, because I think Euron is more of an endgame boss. I've kind of been convinced to go that way, but I don't think Aegon is going to interact with him, no. And the other thing here to think about is, like, how would Aegon even do battle with Euron? Like, Aegon doesn't have the naval power to go against Euron. The only way that would happen is if he had kind of the red wines with him, and that he doesn't have that right now. So to win support from the Reach, to even do battle with Euron, he would have to already have the support of the Reach, in my opinion. But I don't know. You guys might think differently on that. Crosslin asks, how will Littlefinger adapt to maintain power when Aegon likely becomes king? So the only way I see that Littlefinger gains significant amount of power is if he marries Sansa to young Griff. I don't see that happening because, one, I think there's so many different candidates that are much closer to young Griff that make more sense for young Griff at this time. Ariane's right there, and her whole arc is about how kind of she's able to manipulate men, seduce men. Again, that's kind of her whole part with Eris, how she is, again, extremely beautiful. And that makes a lot of sense for me on the downfall of Doran. He picks the wrong Targaryen, or not even a Targaryen, a Blackfyre. I think that makes more sense. Even Marjorie, again, going with young Griff makes a lot of sense given how the Reach constantly flips sides and the political marriage that young Griff would want there. I think he would still try it. I do think he would still try it. But here's the other part of this, right? Sansa is not going to want to get married again to some other guy, right? Now, again, she will become queen in this scenario. I just don't think she's going to do that. So the other part of this is like Littlefinger. Then, if that doesn't work out, his whole plan. He tells Sansa is based around giving Sansa all of the power, which doesn't make sense for him because he's then going to his whole power base is, can he manipulate Sansa? And if he can't, then he's screwed. And so I talk about this a lot with Littlefinger, is like, I think it makes the most sense for Robin to still be in power because then he himself has the power. I think all that's going to unravel with Sansa kind of growing and getting more intellectually smart, more information coming to the forefront. So to me, I don't think he's going to be that involved with Aegon. He may try, and I don't think it maybe is going to work. Continuing on, we have a question from Noah, and this is more getting into kind of the later game of the story and kind of the Dany young Griff plot, and again, more of the other plot as well. Do you see any possible way that he survives the entire story? Obviously, it's very unlikely, but I'd like to think there's a possibility. There's a very small chance, but I don't think so, no. I think young Griff is in a position where he just has to go for a character like Dany, if we're going to see maybe Jon, if there's some sort of great council called of which we're switching the system, right? If the whole idea for George is, we got to flip-flop the system. If we keep having, this monarchy, the Targaryens on the throne, well, we're still going to have conflict. Nothing resolves itself outside of maybe the plot with the others. And even then, I don't think that's going to be completely resolved either. I think that's going to be something where we see a compromise is made once again. And so I don't see young Griff being on the throne for that exact reason, because I think something has to switch up. We can't keep doing the same thing. Now, maybe George does end up doing that. Maybe George is like, that's the irony of it, right? We go through this whole thing and nothing changes. We're caught in this cycle, right? Until we finally get more of a structured government body to where it prevents inner conflict and civil wars constantly. Moving on, we have Durian, who sounds a lot like Durin from, Lord of the Rings. So Durian asks, what is the most unexpected thing you think Aegon might actually do? That's a tough one because for me personally, I think Aegon is more straightforward. I would think the thing that I would say I don't really expect him to do is to be someone that allies with Dany and Jon against the others very willingly. I think he is someone that is in a tough position because if he goes and fights the others, it's going to weaken his position. Like everything Cersei was talking about on why the reason she didn't want to fight the others are valid. But the difference is that I think you see with that is like if you saw a zombie like apocalypse thing basically on the horizon, you would help because you realize everyone's going to die. That's the rational way of looking at it. I think young Griff is in this situation where does he help? Does he not help? And that could be something where his hatred of maybe Dany because of what she's spreading about him, their possible rivalry. I don't know how he fits into the others plot, right? Is he someone that maybe he gives his life in this war? We don't even get to see a Dany and Aegon resolution. Who knows? So I think where I would look for the most unexpected things with Aegon would be anything to do with kind of the others plot and how that works. Like, is Aegon still going to be on the throne, right? When Dany and Jon are dealing with the others plot? Or is he going to be dealt with before then? Who knows? Transformers asks, how do you think Griff and Dany will clash? As in, how will they handle the succession? I think that Dany will kill young Griff. I think Dany kills young Griff. I think she's going to be involved in killing a lot of the Dornish. You know, Duran, I think, is going to be one of those tragic characters where he watches his entire family die. I think Dany will be the reason young Griff dies. Avery says, do you think there will be a Dance of Dragons 2.0 between him and Dany? Yeah. So this is actually interesting because the other thing would be, if I actually want to go back up to the unexpected thing, Aegon taming a dragon, getting one of the dragons and leveling the playing field. I think that could be a really interesting idea, just going back to Dorian's question, but it's hard because it won't be a Dance of the Dragons in the idea of like, Aegon right now doesn't have a dragon. So in like the names, yes, it would. I would compare it much more as in the state it's in right now, a Blackfyre rebellion, more like. That's what it kind of gives me more the vibe of, like, because it's not like a whole nation conflict with dragons. It's more like one person has a dragon, the other one doesn't. And also one of them's going to be probably a Blackfyre. Will young Griff's true identity ever be revealed, or will it be left up to interpretation? I'm kind of 50-50 on this one as well, because I think the way George writes things, I think it makes a lot of sense for it to be left up to interpretation. But at the same time, I definitely could see a situation where we find out that he is a Blackfyre through Illyrio, so that kind of confirms it to us that yes, he is a Blackfyre. But to all the other characters, like characters that were not present at this meeting, like young Griff himself, it will kind of be up to, for a lot of people, it will be, okay, they're kind of guessing, like, is this actually true? Will young Griff and Dany meet in Winds? No, they will not. They will be meeting in probably Dream. There's just not enough time. Dany has so many things she needs to do in Winds. I think the best case scenario for Dany's plot is she basically, her last chapter is either her sailing to Westeros, kind of like the end of season 6 in Game of Thrones, or her landing on Dragonstone, like how it was in season 7. I think that makes most sense for young Griff and Dany. But when they do meet, it's going to be weird because I think Dany is going to be wanting the throne, right? But at the same time, and you also got to go into the preconceptions of, do you think Dany is going to have this meeting with Illyrio? Will she already go into this meeting thinking that young Griff is a, false dragon? The other thing you might want to consider here is, like, does Dany not even want to believe it, right? Does she want to believe that she has family, which I think she does. If you think about how her relationship with Viserys ended, like, all the way up until Viserys putting a sword at her belly, or her threatening her child, she still was making excuses for him. Even all the horrible things he'd done to her, abusing her, psychologically abusing her, she still was making excuses for him because he was all she had. And so there's a part of it where I could see Dany being very conflicted about young Griff, wanting to believe that he is family to her, but on the other side of it, realizing that, yeah, all the signs are pointing to he's a Blackfyre. So I think she could be very conflicted, plus also looking at her own personal things where she wants the throne. And so I think it's going to come to this idea where young Griff is sitting here going, I'm the person that took the throne. I avenged our family. I did all these things, being younger, a little bit more immature, a little bit of that, what we saw with Tyrion coming out. Again, also you have to think Tyrion's going to be with Dany. Young Griff's not going to be pleased with Tyrion. I personally think that young Griff is going to come off more as kind of like the arrogant one, kind of come off as more of the quicker to anger side. And because Dany has these preconceptions, if he does any of those signs, instantly Dany's going to be turned off by that. So I think there will be a conflict here just based upon they both can't have the throne, because you also think, okay, I don't think Dany is going to want to marry young Griff. Young Griff is probably already going to be married at this point anyway. We'll be already married to someone like Arianne. So we come to this point where I don't see a way that they get resolved. I just without conflict. Better Call asks, how do you think he'll meet Jon in the book? Again, it's going to be one of two things. So the first one's going to be, okay, Jon is trying to convince young Griff, or maybe somebody else, or maybe it's young Griff is just convinced because he hears the news of the North and he goes to help. So they'll meet that way. Or it could be this way. Jon, Dany, they fight off this war with the others, whether it's a compromise, whether it's this or that. Dany could die, maybe she doesn't die. It'll be Jon's faction, then, meeting young Griff's faction, or Dany's faction, whichever. That's probably how they'll end up meeting. Last one we have is, I'd like to see him help against the others. Will he ally with Dany and or Jon, or will they be and remain adversaries from the start? It's tough because I think Jon is in a really weird situation. He doesn't really care, right? He just wants people to help him fight the others for now. And maybe he has a relationship with Dany, or maybe he's more sympathetic to her cause and all of that. But at the same time, I don't know, because I think the timing is everything here. If Dany goes about just taking the throne, getting young Griff off of it, and we do all that conflict before the others' conflict, well, then that's going to be a whole different story. Then young Griff's not going to be alive to even help with that. But given what I think is going to happen, the timing of things where the others are already through the wall by the end of the story, they're coming south, it makes more sense to me that you would have young Griff, Dany, and Jon maybe put all their differences aside, and maybe they fight the others. There's just so many questions. My biggest question with young Griff's storyline is if he helps with the others, and to what extent does he do that? So yeah, let me know what you guys think with young Griff and the whole others plot line. I know a lot of people think maybe he's Azor Ahai, right? Maybe he's the prince that was promised. Maybe that's possible. I think it's not likely, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys all enjoyed this one. This was, and I knew it was going to be a very long video. We're pushing, I think, 40 minutes as I'm recording. I've done this in 2 different sessions, but yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed our young Griff discussions, like always, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.